I've been working with the idea of regeneration for just this fall will be 40 years. So it is not new to me. And John asked me to come, and he said, why don't you just start off and stir people up? I said, I can do that. I'm very worried about all of us, including me. I'm worried because every time there's a revolution, every time there's an intention to do something great, we often do not change how we think about it. Instead, what we do is we work on the thing that we're going to change using pretty much the same method we've used before. So I said what I want to talk about is how do we know how we are to think as a way to consider today. So all of us here came because we have the intention to improve the economic system and all of the things that means, the financial, the investment, everything that goes with it, because in the little conversations I've been having, we know that it's foundational to everything. But our tendency is to change what we're doing, and I'm going to suggest and give some offerings of guidelines we might use to watch our thinking and see if the way we're thinking actually will get us there. So what do I mean by that? So we all start off with judging that the performance we're getting with the current economy is not working well. I don't think there's anybody in this room would say, yep, it's turning out to support everybody, do all the kinds of thing about equity, equality we want. Nope, it's got a problem. And that comes from all the actions we keep taking. And we come up with lots of ideas about the actions we should keep taking. And we're even pretty well sure that it comes from the thinking that we've currently got. David Bohm called that thoughting, which basically meant I don't actually have new thoughts. I have thoughts I think are new thoughts, and I've said them so long and I have a rationale for them that's so strong that even when I'm standing before you, I actually think I'm thinking right now when really all I'm doing is thoughting. So there's a risk for us, and I think there's a risk with us as we take off here today to do thoughting if we aren't mindful and able to watch. What our tendency is to do is every time there is a need for change, which I love John's paper, the great transition, right? The ability to move us somewhere is that we usually introduce a new subject. So I'm old enough that I remember when the whole idea of human resources was introduced into business with all the human resource practices, most of which are undermining performance, health, vitality, and enterprise of business. I spend most of my time undoing them. Then we brought in the idea of sustainability. We have to, this new what we have to think about. And as I watch sustainability officers and practices be created, I watch them creating things that are undermining the health and vitality of the earth. Now we have regenerative capitalism. Oh my God, I'm scared to death. Right? That we could end up creating another new grand idea, but we don't work on how we are thinking. So what I want to offer us today is some suggested guidelines that relate to this paradigmatic notion. The idea of maybe of epistemology, how we're allowed to even know things and go about knowing it. How we think may be the answer, and I believe where the real power comes is moving way back upstream. So I'm going to suggest a few things today, and you can ignore me if you want, which I know you will. And I could perfectly be wrong about all of this, but I ask you to at least test it for yourself. So here's the thing John introduced to us, and I think it's a really useful way of thinking. The way we think can, and I'm sure there's more than two, we've tended to bundle them into two ideas about there is the physical, mechanical worldview of thinking, and then there's the living systems world. Everybody can relate to that, right? I bet there's no one in this room who hasn't used that example and said, yep, we got to move out of the physical, mechanical world. I think there's a pretty strong dividing line between these that I want to talk about, and I want to carry it down into a little more detail about what I think goes on that might give us some guidelines here. So the physical world is usually about things like cars, where the living systems world is things about like cats, right, where things are alive. Now there are some characteristics of this physical worldview. One is we think it's made up of parts in pieces. We can take them apart. Well, they're interchangeable, by the way. They deteriorate and wear out over time. But how exciting. We can put it back together and the car still runs. right? We can turn on the engine, no matter which part we put in, the car still runs. I think that there are things we need to be mindful of in watching even our language. And if any of you hang around me just a little bit, you'll notice that I constantly stop you on language, and people have accused me of being a human thesaurus. That's not my intention. My intention is to challenge paradigms, because I think language shows up in the paradigm. So I think some of the language we might watch for are when we talk about parts and pieces. Nature has no parts and pieces. I don't care how much you chop it up. It's not interchangeable. Pieces are not replaceable, and they're not replicable by moving one to the other. But we end up talking about putting together models so that we can replicate them somewhere else. So just pay a little attention. You know, I do it too. People catch me, and I love it when they catch me, because it means I'm helping get my own mind more conscious. Now, it doesn't work when we talk about cats. Right? We can't put them back together. You get a skeleton, and as far as I know, I've never seen anybody yet who can totally reassemble a cat after having cut it apart, or a watershed, although I call them life sheds because I think watersheds are an anthropocentric term. It's where our water comes from, or our food shed, or our air shed, you know. It's a life shed. So again, it's another language thing. I want to introduce you to my way of thinking about regenerative. And there's a big risk in what I'm about to do. I have never done this standing in front of a group like this. I always do it in a 3 to 8 year process of working with an organization, building the capacity to understand it, to live it, to apply it, and it doesn't usually work when you tell people. So I have very little faith this will make any difference. Right? However, I want to be wrong. I want us to at least try it. The big risk is that we will think of the ideas I'm about to offer as being out there. Things that we work on, the ways we do something different, when it's really about in here and in here. It's really about being able to see how we're thinking. And so I want to take the physical world view and talk about how we tend to think about normal, everyday, great subjects when we're thinking of them from the physical world view. So we often think, most of the time what we think about is how we operate. Now we all operate, and by the way, people do all of the things I'm going to talk about here at the same time. But operate, it can be when we're producing a product, when we're extracting ore from a hillside, when we're planting a riverbank. All of those have operations in them. We usually, however, when we're in the physical world, think of somebody separate as doing the maintaining and sustaining work. So some people operate, and then others do the efficiency work and figure out how to improve it, as though they are completely separate things. So what we have to pay attention to here, and I'm going to keep building this, so just hang on for a minute, it takes a second to put it all together, is that we are talking about one person starting to be able to do the operate work, which means I'm doing the work, I'm thinking about how it is I maintain and sustain it, and this can be whether you're planning a city, doing an economic development plan, whether you're building a co-op, whether you're running a production line, or raising a family. You have to do all of these at one time to build toward regenerative. Now, here's what makes it start to become non-regenerative, is we do those things thinking about them as though the law of thermodynamics applies to them, that they decay over time, and that they go downhill, and so we have to prevent them from going downhill. And I call it arresting disorder. We put so much energy into arresting disorder that we actually can't think about how it is we might do something in our operations. So here is another way of describing what I think is probably, well, John Mohawk, who teaches at Buffalo, New York University, I don't know, some of you may know John Mohawk. I am part Mohawk, and so I relate to that lineage also, is that one of the biggest challenges we have at moving to living systems thinking is that we in the West are addicted to ideals, best practices, and standards. Every time a new system comes about, sustainability, human resources, maybe regenerative capitalism, it brings along with it a set of best practices, standards, and ideals. And all of those are about, usually, I haven't seen any that aren't yet, are often about arresting disorder. So the other problem with these ideals, as John Mohawk points out, is they all come from the Western mind, which is the mind that sees things as parts and pieces and came through the Industrial Revolution. And it's very difficult. In fact, there are no ideals when you get outside of that degenerative mind. So what would we do instead? This is not moving. There we go. One last point. Most of these spend a lot of time trying to get things back above. So let me just add one more point here about what it is the mind does when it's working with a physical entropic worldview on operate work. So remember, this is just like everyday work and then trying to improve efficiency. It sees everything as a problem. Even listen for the word problem. Problem comes out of a Western worldview of entropic thinking. It does not exist in living systems. I dare you to find a living system that sits around and does problem solving and comes up with all of its problems. It does not think of the world that way. So I want to suggest that we think about something above this line. This orange line represents the ideal. The ideals that we put there, not my ideals, but the idea of ideals. And I believe that it's insufficient to getting us to working on what John is chartering us to do, and I'm very excited about being a part of. I don't know about you. I feel very excited to be in this conversation with all of you amazing people. But I believe we have to shift so that when we think about living systems, we work on it not with the same mind we've used before. So I'm going to suggest two ways of thinking that are different, that I think might provide us some characteristics and principles for being regenerative. The first is that we work on the improving of systems and our way of working in it. So if we think about a child or a school, we're always with a nested system in mind. We're always with the next level of system and the next level of system, depending on how big our mind can go. So a child is always worked on in education processes within a system of a family, within a community. Teachers are the same way. You know, the idea that we take teachers and make them responsible as though they weren't a part of a system just drives me insane. I don't know about you guys, but the whole idea of that we don't work on improving systems and our part in it. Let me give you one more piece, and then I want to tell you an amazing story which I got to live and be a part of. I think regeneration is about the evolution of wholes, which is what John referred to. And wholes come in various sizes, and they are nested. So we have an individual, right? Alan is a whole. But he's a whole within other wholes. He's a whole within a community. He's a whole within a nation. He's a whole within a continent. He's a whole within Earth. And so the idea that they are all evolving is important. And seeing them as alive and evolving is a very critical piece to being regenerative. And seeing it as going not downhill, but as going towards something. And I call that something essence. So I don't think we can actually have a conversation about regeneration unless we see that each whole has an essence. So how many of you have children? Okay, how many of you were children? Okay, so this story will work no matter what, even if you don't have children. I asked a friend of mine, Stephanie Ryan, who lives on Whidbey, one day about her son. I said, so tell me how he's doing. What are 8-year-olds like? And she said, oh my God. And she went through what 8-year-olds do. Now they've got frogs in his pocket every time he comes home. He's late for dinner. He's off, down the road. I said, well, what's Aaron like? And suddenly she lit up, and we had a conversation about the uniqueness and distinctiveness of this child and what his discovery was and what those frogs were about. When we looked at him as an 8-year-old, as a commodity, it takes the life out of it. But if you look at the essence and the uniqueness of this child, you come to life. Now that seems clear, but what happens if you take it on a grand scale? I had the extraordinary opportunity to be in South Africa the 2 years before the elections and the year afterwards, and to be involved in helping create and build a new South Africa. because one brilliant leader had the courage in Colgate-Palmolive to say, I'm not closing down this facility as you told me to from New York. I am going to not lose those 6,000 jobs. I actually want to build a great country while we build a great company. So we did work on what's the essence of that region, because we wanted to build it based on understanding that place, not some best practices which were bought from the States or Europe or somewhere else. Nothing was transferable. It was based on the uniqueness of that place. And the ideas that we played with, and if we had Story of Place then, we probably would have gotten even stronger. We didn't have it yet. I was trying to figure it out all by myself. We said, well, one of the things about this region, and we didn't draw it by the nation because, they don't think of it as those little lines that are there that the Europeans put in place. But we know that it's about quantum development. If you look at what happened even to the human race and its forming, there was a great jump that happened there. And they said, why don't we build that into what we're doing? And another piece was that all the tribes they had always believed in a reciprocal exchange. Sure, there were wars and battles, but what they paid attention to was whether things were balanced. And every tribe, and we had 8 of them sitting in the room, said, that's how we've always been. We said, why don't we build that into this process? And the other thing they talked about was the essence was the self-to-self relationships they had, where they did not judge or demean another person, even when they harmed them. And they told the stories about Mandela and cried. We want to be like that. We want to build it. So we ended up building a business that transformed an economy and governance. Let me give you 2 or 3 short pieces of that. A lot more of it in the book, and it's extraordinary. If you do nothing else, I'll send you that piece and you can read it. Isaac Michiel, who was a detergent tower operator, is a good example of what this took on and how it is when essence becomes alive, you have a chance of being regenerative. He said, I want that to happen in Soweto Township where I live. And I know I run a detergent tower, but I want to be able to create this kind of quantum development. And oral health is a huge issue, and our company, Colgate-Palmolive, by the way, is about oral health. So he committed to returning around the oral health of the children in Soweto. He got dentists involved. He knew that it had to change the economy too. So he got education and development, and we helped him design processes where he put women to work selling capfuls of toothpaste, because that's what they could afford, educating people on how it is the oral health worked. He got dentists to track their health so that we could prove we were doing it. And in the process, he's going back to work every day, taking all of this stuff and transforming Colgate so we were able to grow it 40% every 3 months in revenues. So it was no trade-offs whatsoever in the process, but it was all based on this idea of driving from the essence conversations that we had and being able, therefore, to build something totally amazing out of essence understanding. If we brought in the regular, David, you know this, the regular economic development processes, we would have killed the place, right? And instead, we had operators, managers, everybody who was working from essence. Then we went back and worked on improving the working systems, right? The economic system. Isaac ended up chairing one of Mandela's councils that were governing Soweto and ended up leading much of the development because he understood the essence of the community and he was able to take these quantum jumps. So here are my 3 guidelines. Take them for what you will. The first is that we avoid, as we go forward with this challenge that John has given us, we avoid ideals and can't even say it, creating ideologies, thank you. I got too many letters in there. Because of the ideals we get trapped in. We don't look for patterns to follow, we become pattern generators based on the essence, which is the second one. Understand that every whole has an essence and it's being revealed, and our work is to join with it in the revolution of its essence, whether we're building a co-op, which we did in South Africa, whether we're building a business, whether we're building a small community, or we're building a new financial system. To work from essence and know that every whole has one. To work and think about giving life rather than arresting disorder. That would mean that this system that I drew earlier no longer has a line here, which is above and below the line. All of it has life being given to it, and the lines are all the same. Because the person who's running a detergent tower, as Isaac Michiel would tell you, is he operated the tower while he was thinking about how to improve it, while he was thinking about the system he had to change out in the community, and while he was thinking about the essence. And every act he took, he was thinking about all of those. I think that's the kind of thinking we have to figure out how to do. And by the way, I just wanted you to know what the source of these are. I told John, and he says, tell him. I said, okay, we'll tell him. My work is built on the study of Hinduism, Sufism, and Buddhism. These themes run all the way through it, through modern philosophies, through modern Christian mystics, through modern neuroscience. I spent time working on neuropsychology for years and got hooked on it, so I still track it. And it's in quantum mechanics and evolutionary biology. So none of it's mine. It really is the themes that have existed throughout history. So here's what I ask us to do. See if we can remember to start above this line in regenerative and have it permeate even the work we're doing and thinking about on the doing and the improving and efficiencies. And even when we're thinking about systems, can we start and have it permeate our work? Can we be self-managing in regard to our reactive and defensiveness, to our own ego and positioning of the idea we brought in or are working on? Because I believe that's one of the things about how the mind works also, is it works on the self who is trying to have an idea and manages that self. So we'll be working on how we're thinking as we develop what we're thinking. And hopefully we can all engage consciousness and reflection as our constant friend and our source of personal growth. Thank you very much.